If you ask most people about the CPP decision, they'll tell you it's about break-even age. When do you get the most total dollars back? That's the wrong question. What I learned in over 20 years as a financial advisor is that taking CPP at 65 can be the single most expensive mistake an affluent retiree makes. Not because of how much CPP pays out, but because of what it does to your taxes between 65 and 70 that you can never undo. The break-even math most advisors show you is straightforward. Take CPP at 60, and you get a smaller monthly check for longer. Wait until 70, and you get a monthly check that's 42% larger for fewer years, because CPP adds 0.7% for every month you defer past 65. The break-even age lands somewhere in your mid-70s or early 80s, depending on how long you live, and the calculators reliably say, the smart money waits. All of that is true, but you are not the average retiree, and the average advice won't protect the wealth you built. You're watching this channel, which tells me something about you. You spent 30 years maxing out your RRSP every year. You built a 7-figure nest egg, and the advice that works for the typical Canadian about CPP was calibrated for people who need every dollar of CPP just to cover groceries and heating. It will burn the wealth you built if you follow it without adjusting for scale. Here's the piece nobody puts on the break-even chart. At age 71, every dollar you saved inside your RRSP gets forced out of hiding. The government was patient with your RRSP for decades, letting you defer taxes every year you contributed. But they will collect. The date circled on their calendar is December 31 of the year you turn 71. From that day forward, your RRSP becomes a RRIS, and mandatory minimum withdrawals get set on a schedule you can't stop. The first year they make you pull out more than 5%. By your early 80s, the forced rate climbs past 7%. If your RRSP crossed the $1 million mark over decades of compounding, that's at least $70,000 in forced taxable income per year arriving on a timer you didn't set. And $1.5 million isn't unusual for a diligent saver. At that level, RIF withdrawals force out more than $100,000 a year in taxable income, whether you need the money or not. Now here's where the CPP decision walks right into this. If you deferred CPP to 70, your bigger CPP check starts arriving in the exact same years the RIF is forcing income out at its most aggressive levels. And alongside both flows sits the OAS clawback window, wide open. The threshold is about $91,000 in net income, and the recovery tax takes 15 cents of your OAS on every dollar above that threshold. So you're not just paying your federal and provincial marginal rate on that CPP and RIF income. You're paying roughly 15% extra on each dollar while the clawback window is open. The effective rate can pass 50%. In some provinces, it gets close to 55%. Real dollars leaving your net worth because of a tax structure you could have avoided with better planning. Your advisor's break-even chart never accounted for a single percentage point of OAS recovery tax. It never showed you what happens when CPP and RIF income stack their forced withdrawals in the same tax year you turn 72. The chart only knows two numbers, start age and end age. It doesn't know your RRSP grew to $1.5 million and the withdrawal percentage applied to that balance will blow your effective tax rate into territory no sensible person would volunteer for. I want to be clear about what I'm saying. Most advisors are honest professionals who work hard for their clients. I've run this practice for over 2 decades and I've trained alongside the people who set those default recommendations. But two things are creating a blind spot for high-income retirees, and neither of them is dishonesty. The first is compensation, assets under management, the dominant fee model. When you delay CPP to 70, you have to sell portfolio assets to fund the gap years between 60 and 70, and that shrinks the fee base. The advisor's income is directly tied to keeping assets invested longer. Not because of malice, because of the fee grid. The compensation structure creates a quiet tailwind toward recommendations that keep your portfolio intact, even when drawing it down faster would save you more after tax. The second problem is harder to see because it lives inside the default settings of planning software. Break-even calculators built for generic retirement planning dominate the conversation about CPP. An advisor opens the program, picks a start date, compares 2 streams, and holds everything constant. What the software rarely does is run the full projection with everything turned on at once. CPP start age, OAS eligibility, RRSP to RRIF conversion timing, mandatory withdrawal schedules, clawback thresholds, and marginal rate shifting across all retired years. When you actually integrate all of those variables and run a real year-by-year after-tax projection, the map looks completely different from what the break-even chart showed you. For most Canadians, deferring CPP to 70 genuinely improves retirement security. But for you, someone with a 7-figure RRSP, the combined pressure of forced income, OAS clawback, and marginal rate stacking can make the deferral path the most expensive choice you never inspected. So the chart isn't lying. It's just answering a question you shouldn't have been asking. Here's the framework you need. Instead of deferring CPP to 70 and watching income streams collide at 71, take CPP at 65, or in some cases at 60, and use those CPP dollars to aggressively melt down your RRSP before the forced withdrawals begin. The logic is counterintuitive because every article you read tells you the opposite. But the logic works if your RRSP is large enough. Push RRSP withdrawals into years when you control the pace. From 60 or 65 to 71, you are in charge. You decide how much comes out each tax year. You take just enough to stay below the OAS clawback trigger and keep yourself in a lower marginal bracket by spreading withdrawals across as many tax years as you can. You're not waiting for the government to dictate the withdrawal percentage at 71 because the balance they're applying that percentage to is far smaller than it would have been. Now run the two scenarios side by side. Path A, you defer CPP to 70. Between 65 and 70, you pull from the RRSP for living expenses, keeping the account mostly intact. At 70, the RIF converts with your balance roughly where it started. CPP starts. At 71, mandatory withdrawals of 5% or more kick in. If your RRSP was $1.5 million, you're forced to take $75,000 in taxable income per year. Stack CPP on top, plus OAS clawback pressure, and you're absorbing the most taxable income of your entire retirement when you have the least flexibility to manage it. Path B. You take CPP at 65. From 65 to 71, you pull from the RRSP for living expenses, but with more urgency, since CPP income offsets the drawdown pressure. The balance shrinks meaningfully. When mandatory withdrawals kick in at 71, they hit a much smaller balance, maybe a third less, maybe half. The forced income is manageable. The CPP check fills the lower brackets you emptied on purpose. The OAS clawback pressure is minimal. You got here by thinking about tax brackets across years instead of CPP break-even age in isolation. At the end of Path B, you might collect fewer total CPP dollars over your lifetime. You shouldn't care about CPP dollars. You should care about what your family keeps after tax. And for high-income savers, the numbers tilt opposite to what the break-even chart implies. Now add a spouse and the opportunity compounds. 2 tax brackets to manage. 2 OAS thresholds to protect. Income splitting on CPP and RIF drawdowns. The higher earner takes CPP early while the lower earner defers. The RRSP withdrawal flows into whichever bracket has room. None of this complexity shows up on a break-even chart. The chart was built for one simple comparison, and does that well. But a household with 2 people, 2 CPP entitlements, and a 7-figure RRSP needs a model that integrates everything at once. Even when the math lines up and the tax savings are clear, affluent retirees resist the early CPP strategy all the time. I've watched it happen for 20 years and I understand why. CPP deferral has become an identity marker. Every article says smart people wait. Every planner's bio describes their deferral advice as prudent strategy. When you've spent decades being the one who did everything right, and every signal says delaying CPP is what responsible people do, it's incredibly hard to make a decision that looks from the outside like financial distress. I sat with a client staring at an integrated projection that showed early CPP could save his family over $200,000 in after-tax wealth. He could see the spreadsheet. He understood the numbers. And he still froze because taking CPP before 70 felt irresponsible, like admitting something was wrong with the plan. But the responsible choice isn't the one that looks responsible from the outside. It's the one your family benefits from the most. You didn't work 30 years, so the government's mandatory distribution schedule could reclaim an extra slice of what you built through bad timing and missing projections. So ask your advisor one question. Can you show me the full projection, with CPP start age as an input variable and everything else modeled year by year? Marginal rates, OAS clawback, RIS minimums, and the forced withdrawal hitting the RRSP at 71. If your advisor can show you that model and the numbers still say wait, the advice is reliable. If they can't show you that model, their default recommendation isn't worth the screen it lives on. The break-even chart your advisor is looking at isn't measuring the right contest. The contest was never more CPP or less CPP. It's what you actually keep. Ask your advisor to prove their recommendation with the full model, and if they can't or won't, find someone who will.